Want to confirm with me there, Carmen? We're good. Good evening, everybody. It is the 5th of December, 2024 at 6 p.m., or actually 6:02 p.m., and we'll call this session of West Hants Regional Municipality Audit Committee to order. Before we do proceed, I'm just going to check everybody's mics. Andy, are you good on sound there? Just give me a nod or a thumbs up, or
I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me.
perfect. Absolutely. Sounds good. Everybody in here is good, I think. All right. So I'll begin the session. All right. Does anybody have any declarations of conflict of interest? Not seeing anybody jump up and down with their hands waving. But before we do, because we do have a couple of new members to our committee, one new to council, one returning to council, but new to this committee. We're just going to go around quickly and just do a quick little introductions of ourselves. I think everybody knows myself, Mayor Abe. We'll go to Carly.
Carly Rashawn, the Director of Financial Services with WHRM.
We'll go to Megan.
Megan Halverson. I'm a resident member of the committee.
Absolutely. Paul.
Paul Whedon. I'm a newly elected councillor for District 4, and this is my first audit committee meeting.
Rupert Janusz. I'm the councillor for the Hants Shore, and this is my first meeting here too.
Absolutely. Here in the corner, Carmen.
Carmen Dewar-Miller. I'm with Financial Services and Admin Support for this committee.
And we have CAO Phillips in the back corner there. Doesn't have a mic, but we'll still acknowledge him in the corner. And citizen member Catherine Duffy is not here yet. We're hoping she shows up very shortly. So, all right, announcements. So I guess we'll call those announcements. I don't think there's anything else pressing from anybody. Megan, you don't have anything, eh? All right, just here. I saw your light there. Sorry. And then we'll help you approve the agenda. Any additions or deletions? Seeing nothing, I'll look for the approval committee. Moved by Councillor Janusz, seconded by Councillor Whedon. We'll do a quick little show of hands in favor. Okay, thanks everybody. All right, we have a minutes from our July 17, 2024 meeting. I think everybody has a chance to read through those. I'll look for a motion to approve those at this point. I'll look to you. Moved by Citizen Member Halverson, seconded by Councillor Whedon.
Second.
Quick show of hands, all in favor. All right, thanks, guys. We do have a presentation while we're here this evening. Audit financial statements. We do our auditors. Andy, Andy, I should have had you introduce yourself as well there. Sorry. I'll let you do that now before you get into your presentation.
Oh, no problem at all. Andy Force. I'm a partner with Kent and Devitt Chartered Professional Accountants out of Kentville. And I think this is year 9 of being the auditor for West Hants, and then previously the District of Municipality of West Hants as well.
Absolutely. All right, we'll just get right into it, Director. We'll give you the mic, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I have a few, I know from past audit committee meetings, sometimes I talk too much, so I apologize in advance for that. I do have a couple of items on my agenda. 3 really. I'd like to talk briefly about what an audit is, an overview of the process and how we did it this year. I guess 4 things really. And then I'd like to give a brief summary, very brief, of what the results were and our findings. I say brief because the statements themselves are, well, how many pages? 50-ish pages. So if we went page by page, you'd be here until Monday, and no one wants to be here listening to audit until Monday morning. So to be brief, but certainly if there's any questions that you have, by all means, ask away. I'd like to, any audit conclusion comes with a management letter. So I'd like to read the management letter and summarize it and kind of go over what my feelings are about that. That's just some of my comments that I discovered during audit testing that could possibly be addressed by audit committee and management. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to do this year was talk a little bit about audit committee itself, because I know there's some new members. For the returning members, I apologize. It's not new information to you, but where there was an election And I thought there was at least one community member that was new, but I do believe Megan is returning, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yep.
I thought it'd be a good time for that because there sometimes is some uncertainty around what an audit committee should do and maybe what they should not do. So I kind of have some notes that I made that I thought would be helpful. I guess in my experience, I see two things happen quite often. One would be an audit committee is too passive and not involved enough. And then the opposite side, sometimes they're overly involved with management and a bit more directing. And I thought if I could clarify the role of the audit committee and some best practices, that might be some value added to the group this evening. So without any more time wasted, because I know it's Thursday evening, we have things to do. So a brief overview of the audit process. In the end, and I apologize, I'm suffering from a bit of a man cold this evening. So if you can't hear me or I'm too stuffy, just raise your hand and I'll try my best to amplify my voice or clarify it. And if I cough, I might just hit mute so you don't have to hear that all over the airwaves. The objective of an audit is ultimately to express an opinion. Really, the opinion would be, are the financial statements as presented fair in all material respects in accordance with Canadian audit standards? So the concept of fairness would be, would a reasonable person's opinion of your financial statements change by any error or omission? So, I give rather ridiculous samples. If we have a rounding error in here by $1, would any reasonable person care? I would certainly hope not. If we missed, $1 million worth of revenue, would a reasonable person's opinion change? And my opinion would be yes. So we feel that's the concept of, I'm talking about in material respects, is that what magnitude of error or omission would cause a reasonable person's opinion of your financial statements to change? So we have to express our opinion based on that concept of materiality. And I won't go too far off topic, but materiality is important. In order for us to do our audit testing, we do have to quantify materiality, which means assign a number to it. So we have a very industry standard calculation that gives us a number, and we use that number as a basis for testing. However, this is very important, materiality is not a number. It's a qualitative, subjective concept about what level of precision or magnitude of error or omission would change someone's opinion. So if I said to you, if there was maybe we had a prepayment of tax revenue that was in receivables, so a credit to your receivables of say $50,000, and it should have been reclassed to either deposits on the liability side or accounts payable or deferred revenue. If we didn't make that adjustment, would anyone really have a different opinion of your financials? Most likely not. Most likely not. However, if someone stole $50,000 of cash or equipment from you, would a reasonable person care about that? And if we didn't detect it, I would suggest probably yes. So even though the magnitude of the misstatement would have been the same, they're very, very different errors in terms of what they mean. Because one could mean just a simple judgment that they didn't think it was necessary to reclassify a deposit to a payable, and the other one will be a complete lack of control around assets, that would, a lack of protection there. So those are key concepts to keep in mind when we talk about materiality. Yes, every auditor known to mankind, humankind, has to quantify materiality, but it's not a number. It's a qualitative, subjective concept about what level or what magnitude of misstatement or omission would cause someone's opinion to change. So keep that in mind as we go through. And of course, we do have to comply with Canadian audit standards and the accounting standards or public sector accounting standards, of course. So there is a framework with a set of financial statements, and we have to comply with that framework, those rules, those standards. So I know sometimes people want anything and everything disclosed in your financial statements, but we are bound by the standards that are set forth for all towns and municipal units. So we do have to comply with those standards as well. And the other thing to comment on there would be, I don't care if a misstatement is accidental or on purpose. We look for both. Obviously, an intentional misstatement would have a different consequence to it, but in studies, 90% of all errors or more are actually unintentional, just human error, and then 10% or less are actual intentional misstatements. Either judgment errors, estimate errors, just things I decided not to post kind of thing, or the more nefarious ones that we're trying to conceal, misstatements or fraud or misappropriation of assets. But the vast majority of all errors are unintentional, so we have to test for both of those. We also obtain an understanding of your internal controls, which is very important, and I talk about it all the time. We do that not to express an opinion on your financial internal controls, but just to see if they're designed effectively, and if they are designed effectively, are they operating as intended in terms of being effective in preventing or detecting misstatements from happening. So that's important as well. And we do have comments on internal controls that we sort of get to when we talk about the management letter. We also evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies to make sure you're conforming with all the relevant accounting policies. But ultimately, our process is to accumulate sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide that opinion that your statements are presented fairly, which means they are free from material misstatements. So that's the audit process in a nutshell. What an audit is not, it's not 100% verification. We do not look at every single transaction you post. It's not feasible. It's not possible. Nobody does it. You have tens and tens of thousands of transactions every year. Even your balances, your general ledger, if you printed a trial balance, it's dozens of pages. So even to look at every single account balance is not feasible in the time, and you wouldn't want to pay us to do that. It'd be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's not 100% verification. It's a risk-based approach. We assess the higher risk areas and do more audit testing there, and we do less testing on lower risk areas. So that's how an audit is done, and that's industry standard as well. One of the new emerging technologies is AI. We've actually used AI the last 5-ish years, but of course, in the last 2 years, it's become very common in all parts of the world. And we do continue to use AI as a tool, not as a replacement for human intelligence, but it is part of our audit process as well. So we are happy to report this year that we do feel we've got sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to form an opinion. And our opinion is that your statements are presented fairly, which is to say that no reasonable person's opinion would change by any error or omission contained within those financial statements. And just as a quick little sidebar, I say this every year, but it's worth mentioning that, even though there could be an error in there that we would say it's not material, we can just pass on this. The historical outcomes here with West Hants has been, if we do discover an error, or if management discovers an error, which happens from time to time as well during the audit process, we have been fixing them, not because the auditor requires it, but because management does prefer to have the highest level of precision possible, which we do appreciate as auditors as well. It's our preference as well. I can't force you to make adjustments that are not material. We do recommend that you do. But in the case of West Hants, management has always been on the same page in wanting to make every and all correction. And we've made a couple that are very, very small, like hundreds of dollars, which normally would be in numbers that you guys use. That's like a penny, that's nothing at all. But we have been making those adjustments because that's the level of precision that management wants. And I appreciate it. And I am of the same opinion. I like to be as precise as possible as well. So we do feel that your statements are presented fairly. We do feel like that there will be no errors or omissions that would change anyone's opinion. And we're happy to report that once again this year. I do have a few highlights. If there's no questions on that part of the presentation, you are showing an overall surplus this year of 3.8, almost $3.9 million. You had a budgeted surplus of $4.1 million, so you're pretty close to budget. And I know if there's any residents out there wondering why the heck would you have a budgeted surplus of $4 million and why my tax rate is so high for a big surplus like that. It's an accounting surplus, not a cash basis surplus. So what you don't see as a part of that surplus would be debt repayments and capital asset additions that are not funded through debt. And there are some that are not funded through debt. So there is a note at the back of the statements if any user wants to know. There's a reconciliation that shows some transfers to reserve, some debt repayment, some capital asset purchases that are not through debt financed. That does reconcile your budget from accounting to a cash flow basis, and you had a very, very small surplus budgeted on a cash flow basis. And again, when you did the math on the actual, it was very close to a break even as well. So that was nice to report as well. So don't be alarmed by a very large accounting surplus, because that is planned and expected, because there are items that you have to budget for on a cash flow basis that do not hit the statement of financial activities. A few highlights on that page, which is page 3 of the financials. You'll see other revenue from owned sources is $3.4 million, and it was budgeted to be $750-ish thousand, and prior period was half. It was $1.7 million. So the biggest difference there was a grant received, and your interest revenue in those areas are significantly higher due to, of course, increasing interest rates globally that we've seen. So nothing was inappropriate there or incorrect. It just happened to be there were some unusual transactions that weren't part of the budget process in that other revenue from owned source area. The other question I get a lot would be on the expenditure side. You show a budgeted amortization of 700,000 approximately, and you have an actual amortization of 4.6 million. That sounds like a horrible budgeting process, but it's not. You are required to budget for the water utility amortization, but you're not for the general capital fund amortization. So it's a discretionary item. You do not have to put the general capital in the budgeted side. I prefer not to, because it's technically not a cash flow budget item, and where you do plan to put some money into the water capital reserve sometimes, that part is shown as a budget. So that's not an error. It's just a weird, quirky thing with how the UARB and the public sector accounting standards are a little bit different, and we have to show a little bit of a difference there. On the balance sheet side, I'm really happy to report that there were capital asset additions this year of just under 10 million. 9.85 million is what the number was, which is a really great number for reinvestment in the community. It's a healthy, vibrant number. I know it's a lot of money, but really what you want to see is capital reinvestment in all municipal units in a sustainable way. And your debt ratios are all very, very strong. And to see that much of an investment in the community is wonderful to see. We do know that costs have risen significantly, post-COVID world, in the inflationary world we've seen the last few years, like road repairs and constructions are 3 times what they were just 3 or 4 years ago. So we do expect to see increases in those areas. So all the numbers will be inflated as we move forward, most likely, including the revenues as home assessments have increased as well. So it's nice that the costs are being increased with this, the revenues as well. There was new debt added of 4.8, which I'd like to point out is an interesting number, because you added $9.8 million of capital assets, but only $4.8 million of new debt, which shows there were some grants that were received for capital asset additions, and also some funded through our own sources of revenue, which are really healthy numbers, honestly, that your debt levels are quite low relative to what you have for capital assets. That's nice to see as well. You're showing 96 million of cost of net book value of capital assets in total, and your long-term debt is 16 million, which is a pretty low number based on what you have for annual revenues and for capital assets in total. So those are all nice, healthy, vibrant numbers. Deferred revenue on page 4 might look a little higher than normal, and it is by about $3 or $3.5 million. There is gas tax deferred revenue of 6.2, almost $6.3 million, which is half of that number. And the other big thing would be there was deferred assistance received in the Windsor Water Capital Fund of approximately $3 million. So that's the newest one. That's quite unusual that you didn't have last year. So that increase would be most of the number of those of the 12 million of deferred revenue are made up of the gas tax and that deferred assistance. But the deferred assistance is new this year. Other very healthy numbers are your cash balance, which is up $4 million, or almost $4 million. That's nice to see. And you do have a very healthy cash balance, which offsets, cash alone is almost as much as your financial liabilities, which is a nice, healthy, liquid state to have. And then the other things that I guess I'd like to report on would be your reserves. Your operating reserves are about $9 million, which is a healthy number. Your special reserves are $12 million, which is a very healthy number. And your capital reserves are $5 million, which again is a decently healthy number there as well. So that's sort of the highlights. On the water funds as a whole, your rate of return was 2.09% on the financials, which isn't bad. I know you're going through a whole consolidation process there. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. You'd like to see between 2 and 4 to 5%-ish range, which is a nice number to have. So you're in the range. But again, with all the consolidations going on in a rate review process, I do expect that to change somewhat as we move forward. So that's your highlight summary. If there are any questions on the numbers, I'm happy to address them. Overall, a very, very strong year in terms of what you've reinvested in the community. Your results for actual to budget are tremendous. I do expect that most of your indicators on the financial indicator report should be quite strong, as they have been in the past. I guess the one area that came up a few years ago was your accounts receivable as a percentage of your tax base. It has been a little bit higher than some municipal units, but it's also most municipalities rather than towns or cities do have a higher percentage of accounts receivable as a percentage of your tax base, just because of the economic factors there. So I wouldn't be overly alarmed. I do suspect you might be in the yellow category this year. I don't know. We haven't received anything back from the province, and it'll probably take them a year to get it back to you. But I don't think it's alarming in the sense that your receivables have gone up. But at the same time, it's probably going to be in your yellow category. But most other categories should be in the green, which is healthy and what you want to see. So that's my overall summary of the financials. If there are no other questions, I guess I can read the management letter.
We're gonna get into questions, Andy. Does anybody from committee have a question to Andy at this point on the financials? Councillor Yanush, you.
Well, thank you, Chair. Talking about the actuals, does that mean now that we have 4 years of actuals to work with for the new municipality? And are these numbers all easily accessible, readily available? Because we get questions at council meetings about actuals quite often, especially during budget process. So I'm just wondering what we have, how much we have to work with now. I just wanted to double check on that. Should be 4 years, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do believe I haven't checked recently, but I know there are, all your financial statements are published on your website. Obviously these ones aren't yet, but the other ones all should be by now on your website. So anyone who wants to see the actuals would have that access. I know some information is shared by Carly, and she can speak to this as well, but she does monthly or quarterly or both reports to council. One thing I had a meeting with Carly before, and I know we're on the same page, and I've spoke to Mark and Abe in prior years, is I find, and it's not been a West Hants thing, so I'm not speaking to you, but I'm just speaking in the general sense. I find a lot of councils, audit committees, and community people wait for the financials to be finished, and then they assume that that is the end-all be-all of financial information. And I think that's a very bad mistake to make. Again, like you have been, I say you as in West Hants, has been really strong about communicating financial results. You have public audit committee. Not all towns have public audit committees. And I do like that it's public. So anything like Carly would mention tonight, or I mentioned tonight, it's on YouTube. I think it used to be Facebook, and maybe it still is Facebook as well. So, that is all public information, and you don't necessarily just have to wait for the financials. So the actuals, yes, there should be 4 years of actuals, and once these ones are published on the website, you'd have that. All that information would be on your website, but also there should be reports throughout the year, monthly or quarterly or both, that does share actual results with variance analysis and trend analysis and context added that are really important information to share with council and community members and everyone. So you do have 4 years, and anyone really should have access to most of that information. Maybe not at the account level detail, but on a more aggregated detail and summary level, that's all out there.
Thank you.
So, and through your worship, to add to that, so once the March 31st, 2024 statements are approved, that would mark our fourth annual audit. So we would have 4 years of completed financials. And usually during our budgeting process, we do, I believe last year we used a 3-year average. So this year we'll probably speak to that again if we're going to use 3-year average, 4-year average, and what would make the most sense. I know that first year always was a year of consolidation, so there was a lot of unknowns, a lot of budget, estimations based on former municipal budgets in the consolidation. So it might be the wishes of council when they're looking at this year's budget that they want to take that 1 year out and use the 3 where they're operating more level bases, and we're not going through that consolidation budgeting for those unknown pieces.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really good point to have made. So we'll look forward to that. It's helpful.
All right, and we see citizen member Duffy just zoomed in as well. If you want to just give yourself a quick intro there, Catherine, to all the committee here. We have a couple of new members, so.
Great, thanks. So sorry I'm late, a sick kid at home. So I'm Catherine Duffy. I've been on this audit committee for maybe about a year and a half now, about that time. Time flies. And I'm a business analyst, do a lot of stuff with payroll and stuff, so diving into the finances to help out, but mostly on processes and everything is my background.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right. Any more questions to Andy at this point, committee? Citizen member Hellison, Megan.
I think this is the second year, Andy, that we've had the new asset retirement obligation in our financial statements. And I was just wondering, I saw in the notes that we've chosen the cost escalation method. I was expecting that balance to accrete, and I suspect it has to do with the method. So I was just wondering if you could explain that for me.
So we did some testing, and I'm going to be blunt on this one. It is new, and I think a lot of people are still sort of tiptoeing through the waters a little bit on it. Mostly because getting audit evidence at this point in time is really inquiry with management, observation if applicable, and then there's like almost no middle ground, and then you go to a consultant report, which would be astronomically expensive. So we're relying on things that we don't always feel comfortable relying on, which would be inquiry with management and public works staff and things of that nature. So this year, when we went through the process, the inquiry kind of came back with, we felt the obligation that was recorded was more than sufficient to cover what we feel would be future obligations. And then we did some level of testing on that and did come to the same conclusion. So I think what you'll see in the future is that will change. But this year, based on the audit level, it's not that it'll never change, but this year they felt that the obligation was sufficient and no accretion, transaction needed to be recorded there and on the other side as well. So I think it's a good point, but we didn't feel like there was one necessary this year.
Any further questions at this point on the financials. All right, we'll carry on, Andy.
Great, thanks. So every year we do a management letter, and then I spoke earlier about the audit process. We do review internal controls. We don't audit them. That's a whole separate process, but we do evaluate their design and if they're operating effectively. One thing we've always noted, in particularly with expenditures, is that West Hants has always had a very robust and thorough control process, which we've appreciated. And to be honest with you, we've even tested controls as a source of audit evidence because you've got very thorough levels of authorizations and approvals, clearly defined spending limits for department heads, and it's been really wonderful. So we use that term gold standard really because you do have extra levels or layers, sorry, of controls in place, especially around the sensitive areas like revenues and expenditures. Areas where things can go wrong. So happy to report that once again, our evaluation of the controls were they came out really well. We did have two small things that we wanted to mention. We can categorize these types of things on a management letter in three basic categories. There'd be, hey, we're letting you know. That's level one, which is fine. Level two would be, this is a bit of a significant issue. It's not drop everything and make action plans and report back to me right away, but we think you should address it, and we'll check on again in a year's time. And then there'd be things that are material, and material would be like, we think there could be serious problems in your financial results and financial reporting that could go awry based on these control weaknesses. So it's a very, very big problem. We do expect you to have an action plan in place almost immediately and then report back to us, and we'll sort of conclude on that. So we don't have anything at that level at all. And the two that we did identify would be in the first category, which were just minor reportable things that we wanted to bring to your attention. One is even a carry forward from 2 years ago that I wanted to sort of comment on, and the other is something that we actually talked about at the last audit committee meeting when we did our interim work, and that's when we discovered it. The couple of small instances. So the first one would be, we did notice during planning that there were a couple of checks that weren't double signed. And your policy would be to have all checks signed by two appropriate individuals. I can't speak to exactly why. I have a theory of why. We do our walkthroughs and our testing. Oftentimes there's a check run and a lot of checks will be signed at the same time. So you get a stack of paper with checks on them. And sometimes if there's a paper clip and one gets stuck to the other, you might just literally miss it unintentionally. It might just get lost in the shuffle, if you will. That's what it looked like. And there was one that we did see that didn't have two signatures on it. We've never seen that with West Hants in the past. And as a result of finding one, we did add an additional 30 sample items to look at, and we didn't find any others. We also did additional testing because that was occurring when I was here for planning in February, March. So when we came back July and August and September, we did additional testing to see if there were any missed checks that didn't have both signatures on them, and we did not find any. So because we found it during the audit process, we do have to include it in the letter. We have one little paragraph that says, we did find some during planning, didn't find anything any other times, and that it is best practice, of course, to have two signatures on all checks at all times. So that's not new. That's one we talked about in, I guess, April or May, whenever that was, for the last meeting. The other one would be a continuation from something 2 years ago. So 2 years ago, you were short-staffed. Director of Finance was on maternity leave, and I know you'd hired or attempted to hire someone short-term, and that person didn't exactly work out. They left pretty quickly. And at that point in time, the labor shortage was well known. It was hard to find competent people. So you were short-staffed, and the audit process was a little bit less than smooth compared to how it normally is because of that. And we did have a very large volume of misstatements that we had to correct that year. It was in excess of 30. And some of them were significant. And our bigger concerns that year were when we identified the errors, we really weren't given a whole lot of assurances that they could fix them on their own, and we were sort of holding their hands through the process of fixing. And that's a direct result of staff shortages. It's not a it's not a criticism of anyone that's here now. It's just you didn't have enough staff on hand. At that point in time, we did recommend some training and mentoring, and additional resources if possible. Again, it's easy to put that on paper and say you should hire people. If you can't find the right people, that's easier said than done. Our firm has been short at least one staff probably for 5 consecutive years, so I can sympathize and relate. But again, as an auditor, my duty is to report that. This year, we did have, I would say, slightly more than what we would say a standard number of corrections, but they differed significantly in terms of volume and sort of severity. So when I said a couple of years ago, when you had in excess of 30 journal entries, and really we had to sort of hold your hand through the process of what would be the fix. This year it was approximately half that, maybe slightly more than half of the adjustments. But the more critical part for us was when we said that this doesn't quite look right, or this working paper didn't exactly match with your general ledger. It was management who said, oh yeah, and they were able to provide us the corrections, which is what we want to see in an audit process. So while there was a few more than we like to see, a handful more than we would prefer to see of adjustments or corrections, this time it was management leading the way in terms of providing us the resolutions, and Carly was the key factor there. So when we said, Carly, this doesn't look right, we think it's wrong. I don't want to tell you as an auditor, it should be X, Y, Z. We want them to tell us what it should be so we can provide some comfort that we're not auditing our own work. And this year that process did go much better. So we do conclude that, while there was some unintentional misstatements, there was nothing intentional that we discovered. Management was able to resolve them on their own and provide us corrections. And we did make those corrections within the statements. Some of them are very, very trivial. Like I said, 3,500, 2,500 didn't need to be made, but management identified them and wanted to correct them, which is lovely. And that's nice to see. So there was improvement that we've seen over the last couple of years. We do have one recommendation with that, which again, we have to make a recommendation. That would be, before the audit process starts, that maybe you take a week or a few days or at least a period of time to do an ongoing review internally of your accuracy of results, comparing your working papers to what you are providing us for numbers to see if they are aligned and supported. And then just having that review process before the audit starts might improve the speed of the audit, eliminate some of the back and forth and delays, and then also make things easier on staff without having to make corrections as we go. But again, it really wasn't anything significant this year, or certainly nothing material, just 2 very, very small items that we thought we'd bring to your attention that might improve your process moving forward. I'm happy to answer any questions on that. If there are none, I would go over to what I have for comments on audit committee as a general.
Thanks, Andy. Megan.
Were there any themes to the corrected misstatements? Any that indicated a control deficiency or anything like that?
Yeah, no, nothing like that, which is a wonderful question. I would say most of them were on balance sheet, like financial statement, statement of financial position areas. There were some accruals that we thought were underreported, things of that nature. HST rebates that we did some work on that we thought were a little bit off. Some of the due to froms, which again are more of the estimate judgment areas, were a little bit in need of adjustments. So things of that nature, nothing in one specific area. Some of the debt was a bit off, and we did some adjustments to debt when we got confirmations back, but nothing that we felt really led to a deficiency in internal controls. I would put them more on the human error side of things. Or I don't even call it human error. If I had to categorize them, and I guess I can say it out loud, I guess it's a big process, the audit, and getting ready for an audit, and management will go through a budgeting process, and then they rush right into year-end process. I would have stretched that out a little bit and maybe given management 2 more weeks or 3 more weeks to really be thorough and careful and not rushed in the audit preparation process. So I think that would be how I would categorize the nature of them, rather than a deficiency in internal controls. But that is a very wonderful question.
Further questions, committee? Nothing at home, Catherine? All right, carry on, Andy.
Lovely. So we do have somewhat of a new audit committee, 2 community members, which are returning, which is lovely. You know, and we had some wonderful questions tonight, and I assume Megan must have some accounting knowledge. Talks about ARO. Not many people even know what ARO stands for, which is interesting and wonderful at the same time. So I do love the questions. I think they're tremendous. As I sort of said in my intro, a lot of the times I'll sit on audit committee in my role and I'll get crickets. And a lot of times we'll see very, very involved audit committee members, too involved with management and sort of almost trying to direct rather than being sort of a governance oversight function. So I thought it might be helpful since there was an election just last month, I guess 2 months ago now, time flies, about what an audit committee function really does, some best practices, and then open the table if there's any questions or concerns. I will say that there has been a bit of a revamping of the audit committee design in the FRAM, the Financial Reporting Accounting Manual. So I know Carly has access to that. If she wanted to share that at a future meeting, that would be good. And if the committee members wanted to read it on their own, that's probably good as well. I know it's easy to find. But in general, the audit committee function would be some financial reporting oversight, and the word oversight's key there. You're not going to sit at a desk and post transactions, but you can provide oversight. So you want to ensure there's integrity in the process. You want to review financial statements. You want to review the disclosures, the notes. You want to sort of have an overview of what's in the statements, what's being reported on, maybe what isn't in there. Maybe you want to decide on adding things or not. And you also want to have a good oversight on the accounting policies that are being used and judgments that are being made. So the whole financial reporting process would have oversight from the committee. Another big one for me is internal control process. So you should oversee the internal control process and making sure it's effective. There's 2 components to that. Are your controls designed well? And designing them well would be ensuring that they can ideally prevent or detect material misstatements from happening. I think of internal control as a sort of a financial reporting control. But from your process, it's that, but it's also the municipalities' strategic objectives being met? Like, do we have controls in place that allow us to meet our objectives both financially and non-financially? So controls on the internal side of things are not only about what your financial statements say. And you want to make sure management is addressing control weaknesses as you identify them. That's very important. So it's one thing for me to say, and Megan asked a wonderful follow-up question, like, do we have an internal control problem related to some of the adjustments that we're making? And maybe the answer is no with us, but if the answer was yes, the audit committee shouldn't just say, okay, great, and then never talk about it again. The subsequent meeting should say, what have we done to address these control problems? So really, a nice question would be, like maybe we should look at making sure that no checks have been on the bank statements, because you can do a little scan and say, are there any on these statements in November, December, January between now and the next meeting with only one signature or no signatures? And then if the answer is yes, then what are we going to do to address these things? So that kind of follow-up investigating process would be important. Of course, you're part of the external audit process as well, since we're here. You're part of the selection of the auditor. I know you have tenders for 5 years, but if there's a huge breakdown in the audit process and you feel like it needs to be addressed, that's part of the audit committee's process. You want to review and approve the sort of the fee in the audit process. Is the fee reasonable? I know we don't have a history of billing extra, but a lot of firms do. So if you had a tender that said $30,000 and the bill came in for 60, well, what justifies the extra 30? Again, that doesn't happen in our tenure here, but if it did, that would be something you'd want to investigate. And you want to ensure the independence of external auditors. So if I had a very, very close personal relationship with someone with management, or if I used to work for management, then I might have an independence issue that you would want to know about, and I don't. So that's fine to report, but that's part of your process as well. And you want to make sure that the municipality is complying with sort of all the legal and regulatory requirements. So, are you making sure the FER is completed and submitted, and things of that nature that have to go into the province. Are you paying your bills on time, like for debt payments and so forth? Things of that nature, just to make sure that the financial structure and compliance are all being met. There's a risk management component as well. So talking about financial risks, one thing I mentioned before was, road construction costs have tripled in the last couple of years. Do you have a plan in place, to be able to meet those obligations as they come up, because roads always need to be fixed, things like that. So just asking probing questions about what's coming down the road, what do we have for revenues? Are we in a good financial structure? Things of that nature. Just asking good questions is really important as well. A couple of best practices for you, ensuring independence. So this is difficult because you're a municipal unit and you've got council members who do have some connection to management just because that's the role. But that's why we have community members on an audit committee with municipal units, and you have two, and making sure that they are independent from management would be important. So, for example, if Catherine used to be the director of finance 2 years ago for West Hants, that would probably exclude her from an independence point of view from being on the audit committee. So you want to have independence, especially from the two community members from management, which is really important. You do want to have some financial expertise, and we can clearly see from what we've heard from both community members in particular, that they have some strong financial expertise, but also the question that came from Councillor, those are good, solid questions. You don't need to be a wizard. You don't need to be a CPA. You don't need to even have huge knowledge of financial accounting practices, but you need to have some basic knowledge around finance so you can ask the right questions and understand what's going on. And again, it doesn't have to be every member, just some expertise on the audit committee as a rule, and you clearly do here. I do recommend that you hold regular meetings. Rule of thumb would be 3 or 4 per year. 3 is typically sufficient, and I recommend these 3. You would have this one, which is at the conclusion of the audit process. You would have one sort of after the planning part of the audit process. So I've done my interim audit work and my audit planning. I've got some results to share, like we talked about the check signing before, and then it's what are we going to do for the audit plan? And you can ask your questions about my process and so forth. So there are 2 with the auditor and at least 1 without the auditor, where you can talk about the audit process, the findings I've had, my management letter, other things that you might want to talk about that don't need the auditor to be there, accounting policies, what you like to see in your financial statements and what you don't like to see in your financial statements. If you've gotten feedback from the community, things of that nature would be in that 3rd meeting. And each meeting ideally would have some sort of financial update as well. It doesn't have to be a long 30-minute presentation, but even a small projection of where you stand and where you expect to fall at the end of the year would be useful as well. Some places, not many, will have 4. If you feel you've got too much to discuss in that 3rd meeting, you can have a 4th one and break it up and have 2 that don't have the auditor. That's fine. I don't necessarily recommend it. I don't not recommend it, but I don't think it's necessary if you have that 3rd one that does sort of cover all the other areas that we talked about. The other thing would be to establish clear responsibilities. So sometimes, like there's ambiguity amongst the audit committee about what they should and shouldn't do. Like, again, you're not posting transactions, you're not part of management, you're an oversight function. So sort of just making sure you have a good grasp of what your role is important as well. So there's no miscommunication. A couple other notes here. So other best practices, I think it's good to have balanced membership. So different backgrounds, obviously you're sort of forced into it here with 2 community members. You've got a chair and then 2 council members as well. So you do have a nice balance there, but different backgrounds is good. People in the accounting world is great. Finance world is great. Banking world is great. Business ownership level, great. Just normal community members is great too. They all have good perspectives. So having different perspectives is nice to have. Effective communication. So don't disappear after the 3 meetings. You can ask questions throughout the year. Email is great. Sometimes just asking an open question, like how are we projected to finish this year, is a great way to start a conversation on your financial results. focus on risks. So if we all know inflation is hitting and hopefully subsiding a bit, but that would have been one question I would have asked a year ago. What are we doing to address these escalating costs, to equal those escalating costs? You know, what do we have for a capital plan 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? What do we need to plan for? What do we want in our community? So those types of things in terms of risk management and asking questions about what your strategic goals would be financially are important. And then the other one would be sort of I kind of talked about it a few times, but monitoring and follow-up. So if you see like, okay, we're projected to be a deficit of $1 million this year, and then the next meeting comes along and you're projected to be $1.5 million deficit. Well, why? Like what's triggering these things, and asking questions and not just letting them drop. Follow-up questions are important, even outside of meetings would be really good practices to have. So those are things I think are important to the audit committee. And if you have any questions on what the roles would be, I'm happy to answer them. I could talk for hours on it, but if you feel like an email is better, I can give you some written verbiage of what you want to have in your committee. That's fine as well. I'm happy to address those outside of the meeting as well.
Questions, committee on role? Councillor Yanish.
Thank you, Chair. Andy, question I've had for a long time is whether the audit process is only about financial oversight, or if it also covers the adherence to policies. And the reason I bring it up is that occasionally I've heard on the news, say from HRM, that the audit committee was discussing a certain policy and whether or not the municipality was adhering to that policy. It seemed to have nothing to do with finances, but it came under the jurisdiction of the audit committee. So could you comment on that and tell me if I'm completely off base on this one?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it comes up a lot. So like I look at things not thoroughly, but do you have a policies and procedures manual and a code of ethics? And that's actually one of the best controls you can have is a signed annually code of ethics. Because when people put their name on a piece of paper, apparently it doubles what that means to them in terms of preventing them from doing wrongdoing, like or more. Some really interesting research on that. So we do, as auditors, look at policies of all nature. We are very much slanted towards how the financial impact of policies would be. So if you're asking if I look at or the audit committee should address an HR policy where someone doesn't come to work or doesn't, whatever that might be, the answer to that would be more no. But if there is any possible financial implication, and that is there's a rabbit hole there that you can go down pretty quickly in terms of financial implication, then the answer to that would be yes. Can I give you a black and white answer on every single policy? I cannot, but that would be the general rule of thumb.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. I had another question, and that pertains to the very last part of your advice about for the committee and going forward.
Yeah.
And typically, you know, when I think of the audit process, I always think about that we're dealing with the past. We're trying to deal with numbers that are in the past, and it's about oversight. But you mentioned that a certain amount of the committee's work could be devoted to risk management, which really is dealing a lot with issues in the future. So could you comment a little bit more on how much, I don't know what authority is not isn't the right word, but how much this committee potentially could deal with issues that may or may not take place in the future?
Yeah, great question. It's there's a gray area there. So you said the good word authority. So you won't have authority to go make a strategic plan for a possible risk that we've identified in the audit committee. However, identifying possible risks are very much part of the agenda that I think is the audit committee's mandate. And again, we are talking, so as an audit committee specifically, but the audit process is about risk management and risk assessment. So you need to assess what risk could happen, like a very, very big risk that might not be relevant, but it's possible would be, are you sustainable? Like, do you have enough revenues to support your expenditures? Not if a business doesn't have enough revenues to support their expenditures, they go bankrupt. And then that's very much an audit issue. That's absolutely 100% an audit issue. If you don't have the ability to operate as a going concern, that changes your financial statements completely. So those types of risks are absolutely part of what you should be talking about in that third meeting. And if you want a fourth meeting, fine. But that's without the auditor there. You should be talking about what risks are ahead of us financially, and then what we can do to help sort of flesh them out a little bit in terms of potential impact on the financial results, potential impact on your ability to complete projects, and potential impacts on your ability to balance a budget. And maybe you need to say, we need to increase our tax rates because we have these obligations, or we need to decrease tax rates, whatever it might be. Then you can't go and vote on those things, of course. Well, you can, but the audit committee itself doesn't. That would go to council. You'd make recommendations to council that we've identified these risks and we feel like it's worthy of discussion at the council level, management level. And then you've sort of fulfilled your mandate there by elevating the concerns that you'd have from a risk management point of view.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Pleasure.
Anything further, committee? All right, let's carry on, Andy.
And that's actually all I had in terms of content. Would like to thank management again this year. It's a big audit. Poor management hasn't had a clean year yet in terms of either we're consolidating one entity into another, or we're taking water utilities and consolidating them, rate reviews, and you're doing another consolidation of water utilities right now. And then we can honestly say that the cooperation we've received from management has been tremendous every single year on the audit process, despite all those difficulties and short staffs and more important things like maternity leave. So we do appreciate all they've given us. And I said it every year, if we took all the audit evidence that we collect from management and we printed it and we put it on the paper, on the floor, it would go to the ceiling ×2. Like, it's a tremendous amount of work they put in for us as auditors. And we're very appreciative of them and what they do for us, in addition to their normal job duties. So we thank them an awful lot. I've had some really nice discussions with CAO Mark Phillips, Director of Finance Carly Rashawn, and Diana Gibson as well has been integral to helping us get through the audit process. And we thank them for all their efforts and time and cooperation.
All right, we thank you very much, Andy, on the work for this process that we're trying to finalize at this point. So we appreciate it. All right, Director Rashawn.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to thank Andy again. And during my update, I'll have a couple things again to address some of the items in the management letter as well, to speak to some of those. And if Carmen has the motion could put the motion up, we'll put that over to you, Chair.
Absolutely. So we do have that motion up on the screen now, committee. If everybody is comfortable with that, if there's no more questions at this point, looking to see if anybody has hands up or lights on. If nothing, this committee wants to consider that motion. Councillor Yanish.
Make the motion. Chair, that council approved the West Hants Regional Municipalities audited consolidated financial statements ending March 31st, 2024, as presented to the audit committee.
The motion made by Councillor Yanish. Is there a seconder? Councillor Whedon.
Second the motion, Chair.
All right. I'll say all those in favor seem to have their hands up. Opposed. Motion's passed. Thank you very much, everybody. All right. We appreciate it, Andy. Director Rashawn, financial update September 30, 2024.
And perfect. Through your worship, I believe our auditor is going to stick around for the rest of the meeting. So just going into our financial update, we do have month end September 30th, 2024. Council does receive this on a monthly basis. You guys see this on a quarterly basis, so you guys get a little bit more detail. We are projecting at the halfway mark a surplus of 373,965. As of September, our revenues are projecting 0.1% lower, and our expenses are projecting 1.3% lower. I know it's detailed in the report on different variances relating to revenue and expenditures. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have anything detailed. One thing I will highlight, if you're looking at the report, you might notice some of the accounts are flagged as red. Red is not a bad thing. That's just a reminder to me that either a journal entry is needed, or account review is needed, or I want to monitor how this count is performing over the next little while in my projections. So it's not that it's in a bad place. It's just that it's a flag so that I can make sure that those are being monitored. And you'll notice there's a few of those, and I can speak to those if you guys have any questions.
Questions committee. Quiet group tonight. All right, we'll carry on. Director.
Thank you, Your Worship. So moving on to the next item then, if we don't have any questions on the financial report.
You know, I'm gonna ask a couple, I think, at this point. See, I'll get to you, Councillor
Yeah,
Yanish. For
mine is, I don't know when to ask mine. So.
Yeah, we'll get to it right now then.
Okay, the question I have is regarding the audit for the water utility.
Yep.
There was an RFP, I think, that was issued, and have we dealt with that? Has someone been found to carry out that audit? Or am I premature on this?
So great question. It is part of my update for you folks. It is scheduled to close next week. However, we have not received any responses yet. So we are going to extend it till after the holidays. And what we have received some inquiries, but we haven't actually received any physical submissions yet. So we're going to extend it till after the holidays. And I do have an update for you guys later in my update, just to speak to timing of a January meeting, because that is a tender that would be reviewed here first and recommended to council for the appointment of that auditor.
Okay. My apologies for
Oh, no,
stealing your
great
thunder.
question. No.
It's on your mind. It's good. It's good. Question I have, I just got received a couple from a citizen member or a citizen, Director Rashawn. I'll address two of them here this evening if I could. The amount of a tax amount of $16,170 for the Windsor water utility. It was a misallocated tax expense. Has it been corrected to date or?
So through your worship, with that one, it was from 2022-23, and that was corrected in the 23-24 statements that was just approved.
Perfect. And the admin fee for the same utility, Windsor water utility, has it been adjusted?
Yes. So again, that was from 22-23, and that was adjusted in 23-24.
Okay. But, the other question I'll leave for a different meeting, not for this evening, but if there's Megan.
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up on the tender, how long has it been out that we haven't received? Yeah, I'll let you answer that part first.
You're putting me a little on the spot. But I believe it was November 8th. I believe it was November 8th that it was posted.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that is on the Nova Scotia procurement.
Yeah.
And our website.
All I was thinking about is it's not uncommon for auditors to come in at the last minute and slide in a
No.
proposal. So
And through your worship, we had this discussion actually today about extending it due to the holidays and the schedules. We were hoping to get an audit committee meeting together the 22nd or 23rd of January to review the tender, and that way it could go to council in January because it can't move forward this month anyway. So it'll just give them a little bit more time, might give us a couple more submissions. I agree with you. A lot of the times they're last minute. So not super surprised there, but we just wanted to make sure that we had a good amount of time. And if we could give them a little longer due to our meeting schedule, we were going to allow that.
that makes sense. Thanks.
If I could, just something just popped on just on that, kind of just brought another question I had in my mind while Andy is still here as well. Just on the audit process as well, on the audit process, Director Rashawn and Andy as well, because it's carried on quite a lengthy time after the year end, obviously March 31st. I always wonder, does it create a bigger strain on staff because it is so late and we're coming up to year end in a couple of months for 24, 25, and then we'll begin the audit process, bam, right after that. So do you foresee in the future that we will catch up and have this audit complete, let's say June, July-ish, rather, I know we usually aim till September, but is there a way to make it more better for staff, for auditors and maybe get things caught up? Loaded question, but
Yeah, I can
So
start on that
through-
one if you want. Carly?
Okay.
And you can certainly off after. Yeah, ideally, from our perspective, we're done before September 30th.
Mm.
And I guess there's like two components to why, or maybe even three reasons why it's a little bit later this year than usual. I would say perhaps in the first part of the process, maybe we weren't quite ready for the audit to start. I kind of referenced that maybe if we took an extra week to get ready or two on your guys' side, not a significant difference, but then we ran into the election. And I think when we were ready to go like very quickly into October, but there was no meeting in that month, if I'm not mistaken, before the election. So that put things back. And then it was on us in the sense that we have other large projects after. So we schedule you for July and August every year, and we keep our July and August pretty free. And then when things trickled into a bit October, November, we had other things that I think we had to keep on our schedule. So ideally, when we set our schedule, it's nice to keep it if we could. But this year, and it's unusual. Every 3 years, we have a very, very, very large project that hits us. And this year happened to hit us in October, November, December. So that was a big reason why instead of meeting perhaps even a month ago when you didn't have the council meeting in October, it could have been earlier than this, but it was on us at the end of the time frame there for sure. And that would be an unusual thing for sure. And I think in the future years, we would still like to allocate July and August and have it done by that council meeting in September for sure, if not earlier.
Okay, perfect.
And through your worship, I'll add to that. So the other thing too is we can't start too early because we need to allow things to conclude in March 31st. So
Absolutely.
typically we have a closeout of 2 weeks. At year end, we give it a little bit longer just to capture all of our transactions and make sure they're reporting in the proper periods. One of the biggest things is visa statements. Visa statements are one of those things that we have to review to make sure that the amounts are actually supposed to be recognized in the period that they're happening, but they also don't come out until the middle of the month. And then you have to process them all, get them all in. And once everything's posted, then then starts the real work, the reconciliations, the preparing of the working papers, all of that work that Andy was referencing earlier. And that does take us some time. And of course, that's where we're spending our time prepping all of that, reviewing all of it and getting it all ready and making sure all of our journal entries and our allocations, even our capital. We can't transfer any of our reserve fundings until we know what utilization of capital we had from the year end. So if we have entries coming in until mid-April, then we want to make sure that we're giving that time to reconcile. So usually for us, it's about 2 months of prep for them to start in July.
Okay, perfect.
One last add-on, if it's okay. In my experience, and this is rule of thumb, and I don't audit every single town or municipality in the world, but if you were to take those 2 weeks that I suggested, and maybe the audit committee can be part of that, like maybe the audit committee can ask a couple of questions, like, have you done a review or whatever, but taking 2 weeks before we start to make sure everything is in really, really strong order probably saves you 4 weeks on the back end of timing, just because it takes away a lot of the back and forth. And then sometimes we just will do our own working paper if we couldn't quite get one to balance, and then that's extra time and so forth. And those week or 2 weeks, if you took them on the front end, really would save you probably 4 or twice what you take to make sure it's good. That's, I think, pretty efficient process, and it makes it pretty effective in terms of how quickly it gets done and the quality of the audit process as well. So I think it's not, I don't say those things as a criticism to staff. I just think it actually probably makes everyone's life a lot easier if you do take that extra week or so to really make sure that because it's a mad dash and you're tired from budget season, and we see it with every town we run into. And the last 2 audit committee meetings I've had, they've all said, I want to start later this year because it's too much. We're working Saturdays and Sundays and every evening of the spring to try and be ready for June and July, and it's just too much these days. And there's been new accounting policies. It's ARO is a whole new process. So I think it's not just West Hants. It's everyone's been feeling the stress of having that rush the first part of the summer, last part of the spring to get ready. So taking that little bit of extra time really does save everyone a lot of management, in particular, a lot of time on the back end, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that really impacted our prep this year was we were going through our water consolidation. So we had a URB hearing right smack in the middle of when we would normally be prepping. And then, of course, the undertakings that go along with that piece. So that was another big thing. And then, of course, I think the week before Andy arrived on site, we had another DFA event. So that was a lot of stuff near that end. So again, not something that we need to discuss here, but just those are things that kind of impact our timelines too. Something that I'll add to Andy's discussion about other committees and other municipalities is I'm hearing the same thing from my colleagues across the board. And one of the things that they've actually done through the Association of Municipal Administrators has created a FRAM committee, because they're going to be reviewing that and they're going to be making some recommendations. So I know one of the things is around reporting timelines and the ability to get, because everybody's in the same boat. We're all trying to close and we're doing budgets all at the same time. So
I was just going to mention that point is the efficiency of council and requests from council and the budget process extending too late, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, Megan.
Yeah, I just thought as a follow-up to the questions that you just asked, Director Rashawn, I thought maybe it might be helpful to know the reason why they were those adjustments were reported into 23-24 versus restated to 22-23. I think I know the answer, but that might be helpful.
Yeah. So, and actually, I'm going to answer your very, very first question. That was the RFP was posted on November 12th. I don't want to forget that. Thank you, CAO Phillips, for looking that up for me. And I will get Andy to speak to this as well, but with those adjustments, they weren't material. They wouldn't have impacted the statements and a reasonable in person's interpretation of the statement. So that's why we posted them within the 23-24 year.
Yeah, same answer from my end, like they weren't material. And also for their admin fees on the consolidated basis, they get eliminated anyway. So on the consolidated statements, they wouldn't have changed anything, and they were very, very low magnitude. So we felt they weren't necessary to restate last year's and just to put them in this year's.
Okay. Not seeing anything else, Catherine. No. All right. I guess we're on to updates.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a number of items I'd like to just make you aware of and or discuss with you this evening. And I have our auditor here too to kind of speak to some of this as well. So first, I'd just like to, and some of you around the table have been part of these conversations, but some of you might not have been part of these conversations. So just as a FYI, council has been discussing a buyout program. And so that will have financial impacts. At this point, we have not determined the totality of the financial impacts, but it will be something that we will probably need to discuss at this table at some point as well. So just as a FYI, we are waiting further direction from council on that program. So I will be bringing something forward once we have clear direction. Another item that I wanted to quickly address again was around the operational audit. So again, that's something that's going to be hopefully, if our timelines work out, we will be starting audit work on that in February. So again, during budget. So we'll be working on budgets and the operational audit at the same time. We have not, of course, received anything yet. So I can't speak to how long that operational audit will be. But it really depends, at least based on my research, how much staff availability they have and how much evidence is prepared in advance. So, and evidence is in the sense of what procedures they have documented, how, like all of the chart of accounts, same as like the working evidence that we would give to our auditors for our financial audit. This would be like the same thing. They would get copies of procedures, processes, rules and regulations, financial statements, chart of accounts, all of those things, meter reading processes, etc. So not sure how long. I'm estimating anywhere between 9 and probably 12 weeks. So we'll see what we get back in the tender, but that's something that I'm hoping we'll have back to you guys in January. So I would say that would probably, if I was in a late spring, would probably when we would get the presentation of the results of that. Moving into another thing, we've had a lot of ongoing water consolidation and water financial related inquiries. It's been a discussion at council. It's been a discussion here at audit committee. We talked about it at our last audit committee meeting. I just wanted to update you folks that the water consolidation was approved by the Utility and Review Board. They reviewed the credit that was spoken about at the last meeting. I've attached a copy of the executive summary and the findings from the Utility and Review Board in our package for your reference. In there, you can specifically see where they address the credit. And I believe, and I'm going to reference the page and paragraphs. So it's in section 3, paragraphs 28 and to 47. So it's quite a substantial section within the order that we have of their findings. I've also spoken about the credit with our auditors as well around just where there has been a lot of questions on this. I know this, again, happened kind of in between. So I have kind of reviewed that as well. And I know our auditor can speak to that as well. But I know we have been talked and discussing it at the council table, and we've also had citizen members reaching out, and to the point where we may have to decide what we want to do and how we want to proceed. Based on all of my analysis, there is no error, and we are following the rules and regulations of the utility at the time. Within that, I've also spoken to our auditors about it, and I won't speak for Andy. I'll let him speak here in a second, but he can talk about the process in which we could take that would be allowable under the accounting standards and the auditing standards if we decided we wanted to move forward. And I can speak to what that would mean for this year. Andy, did you want to jump in there?
I think when the question was asked, like, so if you realized today that you could have billed, and I'm just want to speak in a general sense. If you realize today that you could have billed someone 2 years ago and you intend to bill someone for something that you did 2 years ago, and tomorrow you go into the office and you do a bill for that person for things that happened 2 or 3 years ago. You wouldn't go back and restate your financial statements from 2 years ago because you didn't bill them back then. You're billing them tomorrow. So if there was water charges, like if you had a valve that was turned off, for example, or malfunctioning or whatever, and you didn't bill that meter or whatever came out of that valve, and then you decided, oh crap, we should have billed what came out of that meter. And then you tomorrow go decide to bill what you estimate came out of that meter, or if you can measure it, great, then fine, but you would not go back and record that in a prior period. And there's a couple of big reasons for that. One, like it's not proper accounting standards. You would record it in the current year period. I'll speak to that in a second as well. But two, that's one of the more common ways to conceal fraud, to going back and changing prior periods. So as an auditor, I would be absolutely dead set against you making any prior period adjustments as that transaction was described to me. The other consideration I had when it was brought to my attention this year was you're consolidating one water utility with the other. What materiality impact would there be if we're recording in the current year while you do still have two water utilities? Transaction that would go from one to the other when they're both going to be wrapped into the same entity imminently anyway. I just don't, I don't see the point. I'm gonna not beat around the bush on that one. I think it seems to be a bit of a waste of time. And I don't know, I don't see any benefit whatsoever on making that transaction. But as an auditor, I can speak sternly that you absolutely cannot go back and change your prior period for something that you didn't bill back then. If you're going to bill it now and collect it, great. If you're not going to collect it and change money between utilities, then don't record it either. But I would suggest that I don't see the benefit of it.
So again, that was something that's been a big topic at the council table. It's something that we definitely need to talk about here because it could be impactful and it's a use of staff time. One of the challenges that we have with this billing would be how we would estimate how far back to go. So right now we use the rules and regulations as our guide, because that's what's been reviewed by the Utility and Review Board. That's the standard. As long as we're meeting that, we're in compliance. It's when we step out of that we have our professional, we have to, again, think about our professional judgment and how far back we can go. With this particular account relating to the Underwood, we're not exactly sure how far back we need to go. So that could then call into question, like, how would you estimate the revenue to be billed if you don't know how far back to go? So again, that's something that this committee is going to have to maybe talk about as we proceed down the operational audit, because it will be something that we may want to decide to book this year if that's the case, but we can't go back retroactively to book it. It would have to be this year to book that. And we would have to determine how we would estimate that at this point. And again, to our auditor's comment earlier, as of now, we are consolidated as of October 1st. So it is an in and an out of the same account. So what we will be doing is doing an estimate for an in and an out of account we're not billing anymore, and it will not have any financial impact. So it is something that we'll need to consider going forward.
I'll get to Megan, then I'll get to you, Councillor Yanish.
Just from my understanding, is that because it's between the two utilities, the difference? So, okay.
It's an account previously before they consolidated that would have been billed from the former town of Windsor water utility to the West Hants water utility.
And is this relating to the leakage, not the reading area?
This is relating to the leakage.
The leakage,
Yeah.
not the reading area. The
Yes,
reading area is
correct.
corrected. It's the prior,
Yep.
it's corrected in the financial statements. This is about the leakage.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Councillor Yanish.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. My question, both for Carly and Andy, is when we discussed whether or not there should be an audit of the water utility, the assumption seemed to be that when we made the decision for an audit, that the audit was going to explain all and clarify all of the outstanding questions. Is that a reasonable assumption, or was the importance of the audit perhaps overstated?
That's really hard because, again, that's the wishes of council. So we'll follow the wishes of council. Again, if one of the things that when we discussed it at the council table was, again, cost versus benefit. So, and I think one of the things that we talked about is the cost at the time when the report went to council, we were thinking, oh, this will be about 10, 15,000. It's going to probably be more than that, just given the extent of the work that's outlined. An operational audit with a focus on financial procedures and reviews is definitely going to be a little bit more. I don't know if Andy wants to speak to any of that as well, but he would have maybe a little bit more experience on the auditing side of that. But that would be where we were at. So it was just what we would get back from that. And again, I think at the time that council discussed it, we talked about how these are also reviewed by the Utility and Review Board. They're also reviewed by Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And the credit adjustment and leakage was discussed at the Utility and Review Board hearing.
Through you, Chair. Thank you for that, Carly. And my intention wasn't to pit your opinion against that of council, but I was following up on one of Andy's earlier points in that audits don't necessarily deal with all of the detail that some people expect. So, but I'd be curious to find out what Andy thinks of the audit.
Yep. I think operational audits are a good thing, typically. The hard part for me to even offer an opinion would be the cost benefit analysis, because I don't know the cost. I would be surprised if it was $10,000. I don't know for sure. I would have guessed higher. And then so without knowing the cost, I can't tell you if the benefit outweighs it or not. But there is a benefit to an operational audit. You're going through a consolidation. You've gone through a tremendous amount of transition and change in your water utilities in the last 5 years. Do I see, I mean, again, it depends on what the report says and who does it. Do I see there's potential for a tremendous benefit? I do. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to say. So if you get someone who just kind of shuffles paper and throws some words on there and gives you garbage in, garbage out, if you will, then no. But I trust management to do a sound job of evaluating who's coming in and going to do it. And just for the interest of full disclosure, I wouldn't tender on it because I feel as the auditor, I wouldn't have the full independence there. So I can speak freely on this and not be in a conflict of interest. So pick someone good who has a high level of expertise. Hopefully the cost is reasonable. And then I do think there could be some benefit as you've gone through so much tremendous change and transition amongst all those water utilities now into one, having things on the right path could be a good benefit to the municipality. And
through your worship, to add to Andy's point, that is where it is really the extras that are going to be part of the audit. I physically can't answer if it's going to answer what council wanted it to answer. However, I can say based on the criteria within there will be added benefit, just even potentially improvements that we're not seeing, or it's going to look at management controls. It's going to look at staffing complements. It'll be, yeah.
Good. Well, that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, I think just on my point, the main crux of it was in regards to a credit that was issued and how the credit affects numbers, Andy, and when the credit was applied to the year, it appears as if one utility sold no water, as it's growing, like it's expanding exponentially. It appears as if no water was sold or very little compared to every other year. So, somebody was to look at that and read, is like, brings up a question like, what's going on there and how is that possible? And like, can you comment on that or?
Yeah, sure. And I can understand that side for sure. When you talk about cost benefit, of making changes on the accounting side of things, I don't see it because again, you're talking about one account to the other that gets consolidated and eliminated, honestly, on consolidation. So I don't see a tremendous amount of benefit there on that accounting side, but on an operational side, and this is where like I don't touch as the financial auditor, I don't touch like what your processes are to make sure that everything gets billed on time. Like we do a little bit on that, but we're more focused on what you have recorded and maybe what you haven't that should have been. But again, we just established that if you didn't bill for it and didn't intend to bill for it and maybe intend to bill for it now, that's not an audit impact in terms of historical financial statements. That would be a more of an operational process thing. So I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it could be if it's done well, you could get tremendous benefit from it, and you really could set yourself ahead, strategically, operationally for 10 years. If you get a good process in place, which I think, if it costs you $10,000 and you got really good 10 years or more of great benefit from it, that's a good asset or investment of money, I think.
And I will put the caveat there. That was my estimate back in January. So, I mean, the number might definitely change. Is there any other questions on this before we kind of move into anything?
I see no hands up or lights on.
Okay.
Okay.
So the last thing I just wanted to address was some of the items within the management letter. So in particular, the check signing process. I know that that was brought up at our last meeting. So I just wanted to let you know that we have implemented 2 additional procedures as part of our normal AP procedures that will help hopefully eliminate, because you're never going to be able to 100% eliminate everything, but eliminate that from happening again. And one of those procedures would be we are now printing a check register to go along with the backup. So that way, if something accidentally gets paper clipped to something else, we're like, where's this one? And we're checking them off as we're signing them. Another thing that we're doing is, and again, depending on the threshold, we are also going in and manually checking all the checks that clear that are over $1,000 in our bank account every day. So you can imagine that's a lot of work, but that's why we set a threshold. And on small days when only a couple checks clear, we'll look at them all. But we have implemented those 2 procedures to hopefully catch any of those that are going out unsigned.
Any questions on that committee? I have one, Carly. What's the percentage of checks to ETFs that we issue? Is it more checks or more electronic fund?
Through your worship, just give me 1 second. We actually had those numbers prepared for council orientation based on last year's averages. So I will just pull that information right up for you. So with regards to the average per year, check last year, we averaged 3,377. EFTs, we were at 1,015.
The 3. Okay, perfect. All right.
Any other questions or things to?
Nobody jumping up and down or lights on? All right, so done with your update?
Yes.
All right, we do have a piece of correspondence that was received all the way back in the 29th of August committee, and it was part of your packages. Assuming everybody had a chance to read through that. If there's anything on that piece of correspondence, we can take that now. The individual is in attendance here. There's a public participation leading right after this, so I'll just kind of combine the 2. Rick, did you want to add anything as being here in attendance this evening, or did you want to come up and add anything, or I'll open it up for questions for the auditor as well. Andy, you have no issues if there's a question posed to you or not from a resident of West Hants?
Nope.
Nope. All right. We appreciate the time, Andy, as well. It's we do have engaged people. We have engaged members. It's nice that you're willing to do the extra time for us. Rick, I'm going to get you to click your mic on there. Yeah, just pass them to Paul and we'll pass them around to ourselves there just for time efficiency. We'll get you to click your mic and just try to speak directly into it, Rick, if you could.
Sure.
I'll bring it over in here. I'll get a copy to you, Catherine. I'll scan it and email it to you so you have the same information that we're looking at and discussing.
Perfect. I have reviewed all of the emails that was corresponded with.
Perfect. You got the mic, Rick.
Okay, so I guess first off, I did find that last 10 minutes of conversation and dialogue quite interesting. So I will present my overview first, some history for new members, and try to clarify a few situations as I see it. And I'll try not to get into the nuts and bolts and details. So my name is Rick Smith. I live here in Windsor. I've been following the financials for the West Hand. First of all, I should just back up and say I'll be speaking this evening really on the results of the two water utilities that were presented at March 31st, 2023. The financials that you're approving tonight are comparative. So I think it only appropriate to try to point out the outstanding issues as I see them, and hopefully get some feedback and hopefully get the issues corrected.
We're gonna try to keep it very concise, and
Pardon me?
just try to keep it very concise, Rick, for public participation here, right?
Do my best, but there's history here that if I don't speak to it, the members of the audit committee are not going to understand the issues.
Yeah.
I've been following the financials of West Hants Water Utilities since the audit committee held the meeting back on October 16, 2023, over a year ago. During that meeting, the auditors pointed out that the Windsor Water Utility lost $425,000 compared to a budgeted profit of about $118,000. And West Hants Water Utility had a profit of $340,000 compared to a budgeted loss of $188,000 in round numbers. I was surprised that neither the Director of Finance nor the auditor spoke to these results. As it was able to identify, I felt they were easy items to identify from the outside, looking at the results, and certainly from the inside, I felt that, again, the Director, Finance and auditors should have been able to identify these issues. My initial reaction to the results that there may be some misallocation of revenue or expenses, because really the change in these two utilities was over $500,000 apiece, and that represents about 25% of the total budget and would normally not be considered normal. So since that time, I've been following both council and audit committee meetings, reviewing financials and looking for clarity on the issues, that there have been many questions raised since October 23. I've also prepared a brief and spoke at the UARB hearing on May 23rd, 24. I sent out an information package to the audit committee on August 29th, 2024. Spoke at the committee of the whole on September 10th, 2024. I met with the mayor and CAO on October 1st, 2024. I met with the mayor, CAO, and director of finance on October 25th, 2024. And I met with the CAO and director of finance on November 12th, 2024. So you might ask, why so many meetings and communications on this matter? Simply, the lack of concise answers to questions and concerns raised by not only myself, but counselors and members of the audit committee, going back to the results of the 23 financials. In addition, there have been several what I would refer to material misstatements by the Director of Finance, including reference to the Windsor Water Utility deficit in 2023, including balloon payments, credits in the system, and catastrophic equipment losses, which had very minimal impact on the 2023 deficit. And that question has come up many times. As well, in a meeting held on October 25th, 2024, the Director of Finance disclosed that credits issued in the amounts of $24,794 and $270,110 issued back on April 2022 were applied to the year ended March 31st, 2021 and March 31st, 2023, respectively. This information resulted in considerable level of confusion because prior to that, it was implied that these credits had an effect on the 2023 year. So a list of unresolved issues are as follows. Despite my many inquiries and meetings, there are still unresolved questions. They include the following and affect the March 31st, 2023 financial statement. A huge drop in water from the Windsor Water Utility to 3 Mile Plains West Hants Utility, over 91 million gallons in the 23 year compared to the 24 year. And that's worth about $230,000. The calculation, and just for interest, when you look at your schedule, this is the schedule I prepared. I believe that numbers speak ample words. If you look at the highlighted column, that shows a value of $56,453 compared to prior years at around $250 and compared to the current year at about $286. So the calculation of the administrator for the Windsor Water Utility is incorrect and requires a credit reduction in the amount of $116,000. And the purpose for circulating that is to just show that the calculation is there as well. A little uncertain whether it is actually, in fact, $109,000 or $116,000 adjustment, whether it's based on actuals or budget. So I did both calculations. Misallocated expenses like taxes. I realized that, that's a smaller number, $16,170 needs to be corrected. And inconsistent consumption reports, which contain errors and corrections, as well as over 81 million gallons of water was lost on the 3 Mile Plains bulk meter during the 2024 year. This lost water at the new rates, October 1st, 2024, at retail value is valued at about $865,000. Bulk master meters have been shut off for several years without proper financial recording or advising council, such as the Underwood meter. During a recent meeting, I was advised that the Underwood meter was shut off back in 2019. We didn't see results of that meter until 2024. And let's not forget the motion of council back in January 2024 that directed the CAO to secure an independent firm to undertake a detailed operational financial audit of the 2024, some 10 months later. Sorry, the audit of 2023, my mistake. Some 10 months later, the tender was issued as an operational audit only. You need to be aware that I've looked at the tender. There does not appear to be a financial component to that tender, and that's what was requested by council. West Hants and the Windsor Water Utilities, that tender was posted on November 12th, and I had a look at it today, and as discussed earlier, there doesn't appear to be any inquiries to that tender. And just as a point for the current year, I really didn't come here to talk about the current year, but I think it's relevant. The current year consumption report being the 24-25 year, the second quarter consumption report looks somewhat wonky. Typically, the second quarter reports higher volume, but is lower than the Q1 quarter by over 10 million gallons, apparently due to a problem with the battery. My point is, what about the value of this water that is not being reported? 10 million gallons is about $25,000 worth of water. So let's get to materiality and misstatement, because we're talking here about a possible misstatement of water of some upwards to probably 250,000. We've got an administration fee of 100,000, and yes, a tax entry of about 16,000. So the numbers are certainly adding up. So during the audit committee meeting on October 16th, 2023, when the question of materiality was raised, and Auditor Forsey advised that the number was 180,000. He also went on to say what level of misstatement would change someone's opinion. And in the audit committee meeting held back on December 22nd, the auditor went on to say that any type of misstatement could be material if it changes one's opinion. Well, I can certainly say that my opinion and the opinion of councillors have been changed since the statements were approved back in October 2023. The independent auditor's report under responsibilities of management and those charged with governance for financial statements states, management is responsible for the preparation of financial statements in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards and for such internal controls as management determines is necessary to enable the preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatements, whether due to fraud or error. But we're not talking about fraud here, but we are talking about material misstatements, meaning they were missed, hasn't been recorded. So this is your responsibility. You do have a choice. You do not have a choice but to conform to Canadian accounting standards, and it's incumbent upon the municipality to correct the financials free of material misstatements. Now, I have heard the auditor speak about these misstatements and whether they should be retroactively applied or not. Unfortunately, I do disagree, because this is something that has been discussed around this table for a year now. So we're not talking about something that took place years ago. And let's be clear, in the recent meeting that I held with the mayor, director of finance, and the CAO, that's when the light bulb turned on, and apparently those credits applied to the 21 year and the 22 year. So I instantly had to shift gears and say, okay, if that's really what happened, then what has happened to the revenue in the 23 year? The revenue in the 23 year was only $56,453,000 compared to the other years. It's not easy to see that there's a huge stream of revenue simply missing. And yes, we are talking about inter-utility accounting here. But make no mistake, West Hants was charged with the responsibility of keeping those records and maintaining those records accurately. And again, I stress it's a mistake, it's an oversight, and it needs to be corrected. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the level of misstatement of 180,000 that was referred to back in 2023 was for the entire West Hants audit, which is over $35 million. The Windsor and West Hants water utilities are only $2 million each, or about 4.1 million in total. So about 10% of the total audit revenue, or the total revenue being audited. So I would suggest that within the water utility financials, that the level of misstatement might be $30,000 to $40,000. And so from that perspective, the list of unresolved issues, as noted, is more than probably $350,000. So I believe that's well beyond the level of misstatement for the entire West Hants audit, let alone the water utilities. So I can go on because in addition to the generally accepted accounting principles, there's a requirement to list unresolved items, and there is a requirement to treat these as prior period adjustments. And, the reason for that is that the results, when you're reading the results, they have to be meaningful. So if you look at 1 year and it's $100,000 and the next year it's 200,000 and the next year, for some reason, it's $300,000. It's not just escalation of cost. It's in this instance, there's something out of order, so you have to correct it. And, the other thing is here, I mentioned that, I was involved in the UARB and I spoke at the UARB hearing. Yes, there are rules that govern the water utilities that the UARB had. But insofar as making adjustments between the two utilities, they do not have an issue with Windsor back billing 3 Mile Plains, meaning West Hants. They don't have an interest in that at all. So that part of it isn't an issue. It's more relative to getting the numbers on the books correctly. I do understand the issue that these books are being consolidated as of October 1. But this issue has gone on for a year through call it misstatements, call it major confusion. And it really, I would only hope that the municipality does not have to go through this again. So, I guess the other thing for your consideration is, as the audit committee, you do have a responsibility here to take ownership of these statements. And I won't go into the details. It's all covered under the Municipalities Act, Section 44. So, I guess to try to draw some closure to this, this is only a part of the list of items in terms of your responsibilities, like reviewing conduct and adequacy of the audit and such matters arising out of the audit that may appear to be require further investigation and so on. But, in the best of times, this is a tall order for the committee, given the sheer volume of financial information that you have to review and approve. Because, realistically, you haven't had the opportunity to review this level of financial information quarter over quarter over quarter. The updates for people who have sat around the table is very minimal information. So it is a big deal. So I think, with new members on the audit committee and little time to get up to speed, it's important to deal with any and all outstanding issues, concerns, and mistakes should be resolved. So I really think it's, I would caution the audit committee in terms of how they proceed, because I do believe that you should, give consideration to these issues and get them resolved once and for all. So, such that you also have a comfort level, because there's been lots of talk around these issues, and there's never been more talk about these issues than just prior to me sitting down at the table. And I can assure you that's a result of my multiple meetings over the past 2 months. So I do feel there has to be resolve of these issues. And it's most important and imperative that you have a comfort level with the financial results going forward. So I do thank you for your time. I'm not raising questions. I understand I can only present information. And so all I can do is present it as candidly as I can, because again, this has gone on far too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Catherine, you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And Rick, I had reviewed a lot of the emails. I'm going to leave it to someone else on the detail of the financials. Wading through that level of detail would not be my expertise on this. But what my two questions going through everything are is one, the status of actually doing an audit. So we did get a lot of answers on that, but I would like to, I guess, understand a bit more if it's going to if we think it's actually going to give some of the answers to sort of, like why are there the credits and some of the other questions in place? Because I would certainly lean on people more knowledgeable to really go through all those financials with respect to the issues here. That's my first question. So I guess, Director Rochon, do you know, is the scope of what's out for tender, is it anticipated that it'll at least answer, at a high level, some of the questions and concerns around what's been going on over the years there?
So through your worship, to citizen member, relating to the credit, I just will say that has been reviewed by the auditors. It has been reviewed by the mentor that was brought in while I was away. It also has been reviewed by the Utility and Review Board. So it is part of the undertakings as part of the public package on the utility review, and they have commented it. I don't know if you were here, citizen member Duffy, but while I referenced that, but it is referenced within the executive summary of their findings that I included in the report. And I believe a copy of the undertaking submission that we sent was included as part of the resident member submission as correspondence as well, which outlines exactly how the credits were calculated so that it could be verified.
Great. And I do remember being involved in meetings where we talked about some of those credits and everything else. Just the level of details, I'll admit, is not my expertise. So my second question, which is more in my expertise, is from a risk management perspective. If we're looking at all the water loss, what is the actual, do we have a proper risk management in here? There's been considerable issues with the water meters. Looking at the consumption report, has there been an analysis of what the actual operational effort and feasibility of doing, say, a monthly read of the meters is, the value, the cost benefit there?
So through your worship again to citizen member, we are doing monthly reports to council on the consumptions. And our Department of Public Works isn't here with us tonight, but they are doing weekly reads on those meters as well. They also, as part of this process, had all the meters tested earlier this year. They all came back accurately reporting. And we also went through over the summer a water loss audit. And so they went through and made some recommendations, which I know our Director of Public Works has been instructing his team to make what we can operationally, and we'll have components of that into the capital budgets for council to consider going forward, and created some great measures for us as well as part of that operational audit. One of the other key aspects too that council has approved prior to the newly elected council, so I'll reiterate it again here, they approved a CET position which has a water leakage component built into their job description. So again, that person I believe has just started, so they're just getting their feet wet, sorry the pun there, in this whole process, getting up to speed. So again, not sure what that's going to look like going forward, and where the intermunicipal billing component of it has also ceased as of October 1st, because of course we're not going to be billing ourselves now internally anymore. That is a meeting where we'll be talking about how we're going to be reporting those variances going forward, because of course we will not be billing that through the financial system. So we have to ensure consistency to ensure that the data bringing forward is accurate and usable for the purposes it's intended for.
Great. So from the sounds of it, there's a lot of risk management or preparation to get the information to start putting in some risk management practices in place to try to reduce water loss, especially as that will directly impact what the citizens pay in terms of the utility rate and everything else. Do you feel confident that we're on the right progress? Is there anything more that could be done to really look at mitigating this risk?
So through your worship to Councillor Duffy, I know the operational audit is another one where we talked already. That could be, again, point out some areas where potentially there's benefits that we could see or enact really quickly. So I think it'll complement the water loss audit very much. And I also feel like that water audit, loss audit will also be a great supporting documentation for that operational audit as they're going through that process. Yeah. Did I answer your question there a little bit?
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to say this isn't something new either. We've also had leak detection as part of our capital budget for a number of years. So it's a constantly thing. Like we have old infrastructure leak. We're never going to have 100% non-leak detection, like non-leakage. So there's always that acceptable percentage. They spoke about it at the hearing. So you will see it probably within the attachments that I included from the UARB, because they actually will ask us about our leakage and our leakage level. And that's something that they'll discuss at that level as well, just to ensure, we're not just letting things fly and all that piece, so that we are, again, keeping on top of that. So again, they've reviewed that as well on that part. So with that, I feel like we have been taking steps through the past, but we definitely have put a focus on it too. As development grows as well, we have to ensure that we're conserving water so that we can support capacity growth.
Absolutely. And understand there's always going to be leaks, and it's the cost benefit analysis, because there's a lot of infrastructure if you're going to really get it below a threshold, and that also gets passed on to the citizen from a cost. So you kind of got to balance it on that. I think that was most of it for my questions. I might have had one more, but I'll pass the buck to someone else and get back to you if I do.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Anybody else around the table? Did you want to make some comments, Andy?
Sure. A lot of that was sort of management internal stuff, but a couple of things that were audit related. Like I said it before, I'll reiterate it again. If you had water leakage and you didn't bill for a valve or something like that, and like you don't go back and change that in prior periods, you don't. If you don't, it's not acceptable. I would have a big audit finding if you did do that. So I'm going to repeat that stance, and I'll disagree with the community person, I guess, on that one. And the other thing would be billings and expenses to and from internal funds are eliminated on consolidation. So I know the word consolidation has come up a lot in terms of talking about the water utilities being consolidated, which is true, of course. Sorry, of course, so as of October 1st, you don't have Windsor and West Hants separate. They're one, but I'm referring to consolidation of your financial statement. So if Windsor water utility bills West Hants water utility for taxes or water usage or whatever, that's eliminated on a consolidated basis. So it does not have a material impact whatsoever. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter internally, but from a financial statement audit, those numbers are eliminated anyway in your financials. So it doesn't have an impact on your financial statements on the consolidated levels.
Okay. Anything further, committee? All right. Perfect. Anything further, Dr. Rochon, on your end?
No, that's
you're
it.
good?
Great. Thank you.
All right. So our next meeting date would be February, March-ish, 2025 to be determined.
Actually, probably January, to look at the operational audit RFP and make a potential recommendation to council.
All right. Perfect. So I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Megan, seconded by Councillor Yanish. Quick show of hands. I know nobody's really eager to get out of here, but thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody at home. Thank you, Andy, very much.